School governors face a wide range of challenges whilst attempting to manage their schools successfully. This programme focuses on a team of governors tackling some of the legal responsibilities that they may have to face. Our panel has been placed in the role of new governors at a hypothetical school. They'll be shown a sequence of 3 reconstructed events, each developing a dilemma facing the governing body. Their challenge after each stage will be to use their experience to discuss their duties and how best they could handle the situation. Meet the panel. Tanis Jackson, an LEA governor and former additional governor with 12 years experience including 5 as chair. Peter Crawshaw, a community governor with 8 years experience. And Kath Carline, a parent governor beginning her 2nd year in the role. Keeping a close eye on the proceedings and assessing the governor's performance is Paul McGann, an education officer with 15 years of experience supporting and training governors and troubleshooting problems in schools. How will the team handle the challenge? The panel start by watching the first reconstruction of events. A secondary school fronts onto a busy dual carriageway. A pelican crossing is located 400 metres up the road, but despite constant reminders, pupils will not use it and persist in crossing the road directly in front of the school. There have been a number of near misses. One new governor has made it clear that this is a concern of hers. She asks the local authority to move the pedestrian crossing or to provide a crossing patrol employee, but her request is turned down. The governor therefore raises the issue with the head, who says there's nothing more the school can do. The governor complains that the head is not taking his health and safety responsibilities seriously enough. Our panel begin by suggesting various ways in which the problem may be solved.
If we felt really strongly about it, could the school actually pay us, could we provide a crossing patrol employee?
A wider issue, I suppose, for our purposes is just exactly how far it's the head's problem and how far instead it's the local authority road safety officer's problem. And essentially it seems to me that it is the road safety officer's problem.
I would probably agree with that, but I don't think the parents are interested in whose responsibility it is. They just want something doing, don't they? So I think it's really important that something's done fairly quickly, whatever that is.
I mean, I would simply turn it back and say, well, we've just got to find a way of getting the local authority to do their job. It simply isn't something that we should have as a direct concern of ours when it's not to do with school premises as such.
I mean, as far as the governor's duty, I think it's again to be seen to be taking all sensible steps.
Yes.
Because I think technically we wouldn't really be culpable, would we? Once it's happened outside school time, that's the end of the...
No.
But morally, we do have a duty of care towards the children.
The focus on the local education authority is fine, and indeed it is the county council's responsibility for the highways outside of the school. However, there is a danger that a cycle of blame begins to develop, where the parents blame the school blames the local authority blames central government, and in fact a very serious problem goes unresolved as a result of that. So I would prefer the governors, while it's okay to focus on local education authority, to also begin to look at what they can do within the resources available to them to try to resolve this problem. The short term would be to influence pupil behaviour. The medium-term solution may well be to look at the local education authority and involve parents and others in talking to local education authority to try to get a solution. What's missing again, though, is a long-term strategy. Governors are long-term custodians of the school. Governors can get somebody in from local education authority to see if it's possible to look at the whole site, and there may be other safer routes for children to leave the premises by.
The debate moves on to the actions of the new governor in the case study.
The new governor has asked the local authority to move the pedestrian crossing. It might add more weight, well, it would add more weight to it if the governing body and the head actually requested that the pelican crossing were to be moved.
And actually, without the governing body's permission, she should not be doing that as a governor. Really, it would have been much better, I think, to bring it to governors as an issue, and then, as you say, decide on a strategy of how you're going to go forward with it and act as a body rather than as one individual.
New governors coming onto a governing body have their own agendas and their own reasons for wanting to be on the governing body. An important role of the chair of governors is to talk to new governors about the ethos and the way in which the governing body functions and the roles and responsibilities of individuals. It's very important that every governor is clear who has the responsibility to speak on behalf of the school. In normal circumstances, it should just be the chair of governors. However, it's very important not to dampen the keenness of governors. This is a governor that really wants to get something changed, and the governing body would do well to harness their enthusiasm.
Well, let's have a look and see how the situation develops in practice in the next clip.
A couple of weeks later, the issue is still not resolved. A parent of a disabled pupil who's new to the school complains to the school that their child is not being properly catered for. The child has to make a long detour up the road to the crossing, then back to the opposite end of the school to the ramp access point. The other children can enter school via some steps at the top end nearest the crossing. The parents say the school is not fulfilling its legal duties to their child.
I know that this Disability Discrimination Act has caused a lot of discussion at our governors.
Yes.
Because, you know, you're given a sort of a brief of what you're supposed to do and what access there's supposed to be, and there just isn't the money. So you do the best you can, and maybe that's what this school has done.
There's probably some officer in the personnel section who has a special expertise in advising about the DDA, and I think that would be a good port of call. The one point that this parent might have got is that there should be an entrance to the school with the disabled ramp at the point where the pedestrian crossing is. But even so, it seems to me that it's more than is reasonably appropriate to ask the school to do, because it would be much, much simpler to do something about the pedestrian crossing.
It might be easier to build another ramp or make a ramp access on the steps that are there already.
If you bring legislation into any discussion in any governing body, it can throw governors into a blind panic. I think it's important that governors don't start from the legislation itself, because very few governors will be experts in particular pieces of legislation, and they can always get advice on what the legislation requires them to do. What I would prefer the governors to do is to look at what they would want to happen in these circumstances. What do they want, what perception do they want to give to parents about how inclusive they're going to be to children with all types of disabilities? If their starting point is we want to be as inclusive as we can, and we're then going to look at the law to see what we must do, then they're presenting themselves as a much more inclusive body.
It's a question of who's guilty of the discrimination, and I must say I go back to where I started off, which is that it's the local authority who is at fault in the discrimination.
Yes, not the school.
She's a member of the community, this disabled child. And of course, from the parents' perspective, it does seem a bit hard to actually blame the school.
And I think she is being discriminated against if she has to go a long way, you know, all the way 400 yards down to the Pelican Crossing, cross over all the way back up again. Then she hasn't got immediate access into the school like the rest of the children. She's being discriminated against.
The governors have made the point that they think they are fulfilling their responsibilities, and I think they're probably right. However, they want to think about the wider responsibility to pupils of all types and all disabilities. One of the issues they may want to raise here is how inclusive the school is to other children who may have other forms of disability, for instance hearing impairment or sight impairment. And this is an opportunity for the governing body to take a look at the school as a whole and decide how inclusive they really are.
Well, let's see what happens next.
One lunchtime, a group of pupils leave the school grounds to go to the local chip shop. The pupils should not leave the school premises at lunchtime without express permission from their parents, which in this case none of them has. Deciding not to take the long way round and use the crossing, the pupils run across the busy carriageway and one is hit by a car. No member of staff was present near the road at the time.
Yes, so someone's been knocked down. It's a really serious situation. Given the nature of the seriousness of the incident, of the accident, then I think it would be reasonable for the head to call a meeting of parents where the issue could be discussed and he could actually tell the parents what's been done and also reinforce that message directly.
Including expressly forbidding the children to leave the school at lunchtime without someone knowing where they're going.
I don't think you could expect teachers to be on duty at lunchtime, but at the start of session and at the end of session you could expect members of staff to be making sure that the children all went down to that Pelican Crossing.
You need to consult the staff about having those extra responsibilities, wouldn't you? Especially at the beginning of the day when they're trying to set up their classrooms.
It's very tempting for governing bodies to stray into areas of school management and the deployment of staff in order to try to resolve problems. I think it would probably be more appropriate for governors to begin to ask questions of the head teacher and staff and to make it clear what their expectations are in terms of the behaviour of pupils outside of the school at lunchtime, and ask for the head teacher to say how staff are going to be deployed in order to bring that about.
The reconstruction sparks a debate about the risks of legal action against schools.
I suppose we do have to be concerned about legal issues as a governing body that, you know, these days, I mean, unless you take great care over how you organise your trips or, you know, children who have been bullied at school or children who haven't got the exam grades they're expected to get or feel they haven't been taught properly can easily turn around and actually sue the school.
I can't say that it worries me considerably as a governor, although I am aware of it. But in everyday life now, and you can be sued for anything and everything, it seems to me today.
There are so many things every day in every school where one could take a completely limited view of what was a safe thing to do, and the children's freedom of action would be totally restricted, would be totally intolerable, like kind of one-way traffic in the playground.
Surely risk assessments will have been done about that road, and following this incident, it will be revisited, I'm sure.
Legal action and the risk of being sued is something which worries many governing bodies. However, it is important to recognise that the legislation is not just there to provide redress to those people who suffer injury. The legislation is primarily there to ensure that those people in responsible positions take account of all possible risks when deciding whether an activity should go ahead. What governors have to weigh up, and this governing body is beginning to do so, is the balance between the risk of a particular activity and the benefit to pupils of that activity. This is why governors are encouraged to work with schools to do risk assessments. It will be of small comfort to the parents of children who are injured to know that it's not the responsibility of the school.
Our governors return to discussing how best to communicate their concerns to the local authority.
I do think that if we're talking about these sort of things, we're slightly at risk of distracting ourselves from our first line of approach, which was to compel the local authority to do something.
But it'll take months to move a crossing.
But I wouldn't want the local authority to be let off the hook by the head volunteering members of staff to act as...
No, but in the interim, it may be a temporary measure.
But that's just to satisfy the parents.
Exactly. And the LEA to say, this is what we're doing, what are you going to do?
Yes, I agree.
We can't do this long term, but we're doing it now as a short-term measure. But we need some support.
By the end of the discussion, the panel had the beginnings of a strategy for resolving this particular issue, working with the school and ensuring that the school was doing everything it could to reassure parents about pupils' behaviour, which minimises the immediate risk. Beginning to think about approaches to local education authority and perhaps other bodies in terms of trying to improve the pedestrian crossing. And what I would have wanted the governing body to do is to look at a longer term strategy. The governors could look at the whole school site. Are the exits and entrances currently being used the best ones that could possibly be used, or could others be built in order to make exits and entrances to the school even safer than they are at the moment?
And finally, Paul McGann sums up the key issues.
Being a governor of a school is an extremely rewarding and fulfilling activity, and governors need not be too worried by the complexity of some of the legal situations they will face. There's always good advice to be had. There are some things all governors can do in order to help them to balance their responsibilities. Risk assessments are a good way of ensuring that all of the potential dangers are taken into account and that the school is doing everything reasonable in order to prevent such dangers. Governors also need to think beyond their legal responsibilities to the wider public relations issues of the school. What type of school do they want to present themselves as to the wider community? And finally, you're always more likely to get good advice if you tell the people from whom you're seeking advice what it is you're trying to achieve and what you want out of a situation, rather than just narrow the question to the particular legal situation.